AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner.
Hey, Gary.
John, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited about today's show. I got a lot to learn here.
Yes, we're gonna learn all about some new battery technology. We're gonna learn about electricity. We're gonna talk about other things. And I should just point out, talking about electricity, August 17th, 1911, Charles Kettering patented the electric starter, which basically gave rise to where we're at today.
That's exactly right. Yeah, instead of having to crank engines by hand, all you had to do was, I don't know if they pushed a button or if they had the button on the floor. You know, you'd step on it. A lot of the old cars, that's how you activated the starter, was a button on the floor.
So in the 1912 Cadillac's first application of that. So interesting technology that, as I say, brought us to where we're at today. So let's get on with the show.
Yeah, let's bring in our guests here. Got Mujeeb Ijaz from Our Next Energy One, and Nicole Wakelin, too, our fellow juror on the North American Car and Truck and Utility of the Year Award.
Hey, guys.
Great to have you both.
Thank you.
Good to be with you.
So Mujeeb, give us the elevator pitch of what Our Next Energy is all about.
We're working on developing U.S. supply chain around batteries that are made out of sustainable materials like iron, but not compromising range. We're going after meeting not only the range goals of today's electric cars, but we want to push up to a 600-mile capability on a single charge, really to give an opportunity for the mass markets to take root and to make every car an electric car, not just a novelty in your driveway, and get rid of that sort of notion that electric cars have a bunch of compromises that you have to make, especially in planning and route planning and charging on trips. We want to really resolve that you can take an electric vehicle, you can tow with it, you can really accomplish your mission and make every car an electric car. So that's what we're all about. And we're happy to be here in Michigan doing this work together.
Now, when you say 600-mile range, I mean, anybody could do that, right? If you just put in a massive battery, I'm guessing you're not talking about doing that.
What we're talking about is making the battery the same size as today's electric vehicle battery, but with twice the energy density. The important combination that we think is coming is as you drive energy up and the same size and weight, what you effectively did is you got more energy out of the same material content. You drove the cost of the battery per kilogram down. You're really moving in the right direction for improving cost, improving energy density. And then what you do in the market, in my opinion, is you offer a base and then a premium range option, and people will then choose where they want to be. And then they're deciding which electric car do I want, what range level do I want, not do I want one or not. And that's a different level of thought process. Is we want to unlock that next market. And we think it's even the majority of the market that's going to sit on the sidelines waiting for the range to be high enough that they can, accomplish a mission like Autobahn speeds. 80 miles per hour and 0 degrees C is a 50% reduction in range. And almost every electric car that's made right now, that's the problem that we're really trying to overcome, is adding to real world range capability and making sure that you have a good experience driving an electric car.
All right, so unpack that a little bit. Okay, so if I have a car and it's the dead of winter here in Detroit, and I'm driving on 75 going 80 miles an hour, and if I start out with a charge of 200 mile range, let's say, it's bingo 100.
You're going to get 100.
And why is that?
Because of three factors. First factor is that when you drive 80 miles per hour, it is very different, and it's exponentially increasing the load in the vehicle. As I'm driving a vehicle at 55 versus 80, my power consumption has gone up exponentially. That's because of the physics equation related to drag coefficient and frontal area. The second factor, and that causes the range reduction of about 30%. The remaining 10 to 20% additional reduction is due to climate needs, where I have heat. I've got to be able to heat the vehicle. And also the battery's resistance was worse because the battery's cold. So as the battery's resistance is not as good, it's also not as efficient. And then as you need heat and then you drive fast, those factors stacked on each other will cause you to have somewhat alarming loss in range. And at that level, you can't take a road trip without having to stop roughly every 100 miles to charge. And I've experienced that. I've gone from Detroit to Chicago in the middle of winter. I've owned for 15 years. I counted one day, I have had 8 different electric vehicles. And in these electric vehicle types, trucks, SUVs, sedans, you can make a sedan more efficient, and then that drag coefficient factor is not as pronounced. But if you drive a pickup truck or an SUV, there is a problem with respect to the physics of that vehicle consuming a lot more energy at higher speeds. And 80 miles per hour is no longer an arbitrarily high number. That's a normal speed. As speed limits have climbed up, that's a very regular thing that people will do.
So, Mujeeb, I was very interested to see you're claiming you've got an LFP chemistry. Is that right? And
That's right.
You're saying you're now within 6% of the energy density of an NMC, nickel manganese cobalt battery. How'd you achieve that?
Through system design. The chemistry of the cell has always had a 30 to 40% gap, depending on which nickel cobalt cell you measure against. The chemistry is not something that we have been able to remarkably change. What we've done is we've changed the system level density by being able to pack more cells in the same space and then reduce the weight of everything that is not cell, the enclosure, the materials the enclosure is made out of, the thickness of all the metals, the lack of cross members, the ability to integrate cell to pack drives us to a much higher weight efficiency. And that's an important factor as we're designing batteries with LFP, is that we can close pack everything without any kind of restriction because the batteries don't have the risk of thermal runaway. So we can have a higher volume and mass percentage of cell to pack. And to give you an example, a cylindrical pack typically is 32% of the total volume of the pack is cell, whereas we've designed a pack, the Aries 1, 76% of the pack is cell. That's why we're lifting the energy density up, is we went down the road of systems integration at a pack level and not just doing this at a chemistry level.
So to explain, so basically the batteries that have cylindrical cells right now, they are cell to module, module to pack.
That's right.
And so to do that, they need a lot of stuff in between, which gets it to the 32% level. You guys are just stacking everything together, more or less.
In a lot of cases, we're bonding, we're epoxying, we're integrating the cell directly to the cold plate, which is exactly the bottom of the pack. We are not putting separate parts in. We're trying to create multifunction for everything. The enclosure is the hermetic seal to make sure water doesn't get in. It's also the cooling. It's also the structural member. The cell contributes to structure. If you go back to the way an aircraft wing uses honeycomb, thin metal skins, and then there's a lot of structural stability in that, we're using the cell can, which is aluminum, as kind of like a honeycomb lattice. So we're imitating an aircraft structure of honeycomb architecture. The cell became the honeycomb architecture, and then the box itself becomes the top and bottom skin. And we're developing that architecture. And it turns out, in a remarkable way, the batteries are stiffer and more durable because of that integrated design.
And I'm just going to ask a question about the range that you have on there for that Gemini. It says you're targeting a 600-mile range, and you were saying you want something where people are going to feel like, I don't need to have my EV for some days and my gas car for the road trips. Do you think 600 is the sweet spot where suddenly people won't be worrying about range anymore?
I think that it gets you to a real world condition of 350 to 400 miles without worrying about lots of noise factors. And that is a common regional trip where it was too much of a hassle to fly. You want to be able to drive, and you're in that like middle ground where you definitely appreciated the opportunity to take a comfortable electric vehicle that has a lot of self-driving features with it. In my world, in the context of today's electric car, sized at around 300 miles, we're delivering around 200, and that's way too short because you're almost guaranteed to need to stop. And in some cases, on July 4th weekend, for example, I took a road trip from San Francisco to Lake Tahoe, and I found myself waiting in a charging line for 2 hours, and it was no longer fast charged because every station was full. An example like that where real world kind of gets in your way, and even if that only happens once in a while, you're only taking a road trip once in a while. If you take that road trip and you have a bad experience and it costs you a couple hours, you might think twice about doing an electric car as your only vehicle. And that's the idea that we have here at One, is we're here to knock down the future obstacles. One obstacle can be range not being enough. And we're putting it at 600. Maybe the right number is 700 or it was 550, but we want it to be higher than where it is by 2x. And that's our starting point. The second thing is we don't think fires and thermal runaways should be a part of any experience possibility. We want to make that a thing of the past. So we're trying to get materials that are intrinsically safe, that don't have oxygen, self-oxidation or combustion as part of a failure mode. Those ideas become the central pillars in how we build up this U.S. supply chain.
Well, speaking of the oxidation part, the fire part, so explain to us why batteries light on fire spectacularly. I mean, we all saw pictures of that ship where the vehicles were burning on it, and why it is that your chemistry doesn't do that.
Yeah. Well, okay. So if you take the three ingredients in a fire, it's oxygen, fuel, and some ignition. You have to start the reaction, ignition. That's called a failure. The battery shorted. So that in this case is any battery could just short. The ignition is present. Then the second thing is you have to have fuel. Well, inside a battery is carbon and electrolyte. You have all kinds of fuel in a battery. So plenty of fuel sitting there. The third ingredient is oxygen. Well, what's not known and not very commonly talked about, if I say I have a nickel cobalt manganese battery, what I should be saying is I have a nickel cobalt manganese oxygen battery, because a third of the weight of the cathode is oxygen. Inside the molecular structure of the NCM is oxygen. If 1/3 of the entire cathode material is made up of oxygen, I definitely have the ingredient there. What do I need to get rid of or to liberate the oxygen is just a single short. The moment I have a short, the oxygen comes out, it creates combustion, it gets everything hot, and then it goes further, and then it keeps on going. And that's the idea of thermal runaway. In a phosphate battery, LFP is lithium iron phosphate. The formula of the battery is PO4. It's not O2. It's not oxygen, it's phosphate. And as it's phosphate, it can't liberate that key ingredient, which is then causing combustion, which is oxygen.
So going back to your LFP battery, then you're building a plant, right? You expect to have a plant going up next year, and then these batteries in production in 2025. Is that right?
Yeah, it's actually a little bit faster than that. So we have the building. We actually are moving equipment into the building as I speak. We've received our first equipment. By the end of this year, we'll have the battery factory running at around 10,000 cells a month. It's like a low volume level, but it's giving us enough to be able to make every type of cell, validate the cell, get our supply chain ready, and get our workforce training done. End of next year, we'll be at around 30,000 packs equivalent a year. And then the end of the following year, around 100,000 equivalent per year.
So is this a build it and they will come, or do you have actually OEM orders for these?
We have a market started with commercial truck and bus and then utility grid. And those are really two important markets that precede automotive. They help us get our supply chain ready. They help us get our first pack into production. We have 9 customers on the commercial side. We have a major utility that's working with us on the grid, pairing solar and storage together. As we're now doing those markets as predecessor markets, the launch of this battery pack that you're seeing on the screen that happened earlier this year uses an LFP cell that is also being used in the grid space. And as we get that cell in production, which is IRA compliant, using North American supply chain for raw materials as a eventual step that we take, we're ready then in a better way for automotive. We think automotive will take root, but it might take somewhere around 2026 timeframe, as opposed to happening right away.
Why do you think it's going to take that much longer for automotive to sort of buy into this and make the switch?
I think automotive is already buying into this, but automotive has a longer gestation period. As you develop your relationship with automotive companies, the relationship also has to go through their product development cycle, which is that you do the development of a battery and a platform, and then the safety testing, and then the 3 years effectively that it takes to move everything into production. So we are on a cycle with automotive, but we didn't try to target automotive as our first market. I think that it's better to build revenue, stability, yield, get EBITDA positive, effectively stand our company up as a healthy business independent of automotive, and then bring automotive in. And automotive OEMs like that strategy. They don't want to be first. And it's also a lot to take on in terms of working capital and just scaling a company at the speed of automotive if you do that as a very first step.
Mujeeb, one thing I don't understand is that, okay, if you talk to, a layperson who knows a little bit about EVs, and you say NMC, and that's the good stuff. And you talk about LFP, that's the compromise stuff. It's not as good as it. So it sounds to me that you're sort of not exactly flipping that, but you're changing that. I mean, so how do you make this real? I mean, what's the difference?
Okay, so if you're a battery supplier, and I am a battery supplier, and you're constrained to solve a problem, and someone says, okay, I'm going to give you a form factor of a cell, and that cell is your cell is defined, and now your chemistry is NCM or LFP, I'll have to admit we're going to be 30 to 40% lower in energy density and range right off the bat. But what we decided to do when we started One is we're not acting like a battery supplier. We're actually positioning ourselves as a pack systems integrator, which we're then solving a different problem. We're working on structural packs that are stiffer. We're trying to help the OEMs with better attributes where they can mount it with simpler mounting strategies. We're taking all of the interior waste out of the pack that was traditionally there. And we're like moving the materials problem where we might spend more money on an enclosure that saves weight, less money on cathode material like nickel and cobalt, better supply chain, still be lower cost. But I might have made a decision internally that I'm going to spend more money on that enclosure to make up for the fact that I want lighter materials, I want a better performing system. That's how we're closing the gap. If I'm asked to simply close the gap by providing a cell, I only have one tool in my toolbox. You give me the whole system, I have cooling, I have enclosure, I have battery management, I have bus bars, I have wiring. We got rid of all the wiring. You won't see any high voltage cables in our battery pack. We go bus bar to bus bar to bus bar. We laid it out in a sequence where it begins and ends at the battery management. We eliminated all the high voltage wiring and connectors. That stuff costs money. It's a lot of money. Actually, a lot of copper, a lot of connector. Every time a connector is orange, it's like 3 times the price just because it's called a high voltage connector. We got rid of those things because not only is that helping us on cost, it helps us on weight, helps us on volume, it helps us in integration. And in the simplest other way to think about it, the original phones that came out that were large and bulky, they had a battery door. You pull the battery door off and you pull the battery out and you put a new battery in. The new phones, and you could pick any company, any type of smartphone, their batteries are integrated and they're permanently integrated. You can't get to the battery. Well, it's because they want the integration to create a better total product. And we're doing the same thing on our pack design, is total integration of everything, bus bars and welding and avoiding connectors and multi-functions for the enclosure and cooling and all of the other parts that are integrated.
Mujeeb, you may have just saved AM radio too in the process, because my understanding is it's those orange cables that cause all the problems with AM.
Yes, that's right.
Hey, so you've got another battery type that you're working on, right? 2 different chemistries. Tell us about that. And I'm particularly interested in this because you mentioned this earlier of being able to tow long distances.
Yes. So what Gemini's idea is, as you think about the thesis of the company with sustainability and materials and trying to get higher energy density, we love the idea of LFP being like a foundational battery. And I think of it as like 10, 20 year foundational level where you don't need to keep switching chemistry. That blue battery that's showing that it has a driving connection to the motor inverter, that is the same LFP battery that we're in with any electric vehicle today. And what we did to make that battery go further is we designed a special second battery chemistry that only has one job in life, and that is to turn on and recharge the first battery. So it's a range extender. That means two important attributes get changed. I don't need it to have the same life. So its durability can be less, 90% less to be exact. And then I don't need it to have the same power. As it doesn't need to have the same power, I don't need to have any kind of worry about this really high current. I can design it to be very efficient. And basically, as low power, low cycle life, I unlock a bunch of chemistries that are sitting on the bookshelf that have been invented for many, many years over the years, but not used in automotive because they weren't durable or they weren't powerful enough. And that second chemistry is called anode free. We get to the high energy because we deleted graphite. That made room for more active material on the cathode side. It's a cathode separator and a copper foil. As we did that, we quickly doubled the energy density of the cell just by that one move. And we made the factory smaller. We don't need mixing and coating and calendaring and all the stuff in the factory. So the cell became low cost. I'm using a low cost manganese rich cathode. As that cathode is there, it's 20% less lithium, 60% less graphite, 75% less nickel, has zero cobalt, and it's effectively twice the energy density. It's 1,000 watt hours per liter at a cell level. Then we integrate those together. We alternate them between the LFP and the anode free. And in the context of doing that, we're basically showing that you can do range extension with LFP being that baseline battery still. So we're still LFP every day. Powertrain's organized around LFP's voltage and power. And the range extender comes on when you need it in a long trip. That gives you the ability to tow and handle high speeds, handle different vehicle types, handle long trips. And we think that the batteries, the choices that customers will make on battery, you can then have small, medium, large batteries, and you can decide kind of what vehicle platform makes sense for your use, whether the battery should be upsized or not.
So would the 600-mile range be a Gemini battery, or would it be an Aries 2 battery?
A Gemini battery.
Okay.
The Aries 2 battery is targeting today's range, call it 300 plus, 350 miles in that range. It's where the OEMs are comfortable as their baseline range numbers are. And many, many customers love electric vehicles, including myself, that can perform that way. But that's not the spectrum that really solves all the applications. And that's the context of this is a family vehicle, call it a SUV, a minivan, or a truck that has a lot of other implications in its ability to move people around and handle harsher duty cycles, including towing and things like that.
With your total systems approach then and using LFP, what can you do about cost? Because, you know, anybody who solves the battery cost problem pretty much solves everything.
Yeah, interestingly, Gemini is cost modeled out at around $50 a kilowatt hour right now. That's lead acid battery level.
Wow.
That's cheaper than the lowest cost that I could have predicted for where LFP will ever get to. LFP, if I go to where the lowest cost centers are in the world is China, you can make an LFP cell for mid $60 per kilowatt hour range. We can make an anode-free cell for $50 per kilowatt hour here in the US, and that's just us getting started. As time goes on, I think we can even improve that. I think what's interesting about the dual battery architecture is we have the ability to size the second tank, the long range part of it, and it could be, we make 50 kilowatt hours for every day, 150 miles, and we can make 100, 150, 200, 250, we can go up to 400 kilowatt hours. We have enough energy density to grow that second battery to a much larger level. And therefore, we're growing the battery size in the lowest cost domain because it is a battery that's free of graphite, free of cobalt, free of, it's using low cost materials then.
So as you were mentioning the price of building this battery in China. Now, you're in southeastern Michigan. You're building the plant in southeast Michigan. You've talked about sustainable supply chain. What does that mean?
Well, first, it means a qualified supply chain. Like the very first problem we're going to have is we need the same material performance. And even if it's not at scale, then we need to start figuring out how to capitalize and scale. So the ability for our company to move forward and to scale up other suppliers is that we need the performance of the materials to come in line with the best materials in the market. Once we're at that point, then as we grow, we want our suppliers to grow. And I think it will take, and I've done a little bit of overlapping between how China's market grew and where we are now in the last 5 years of growth. And if I superimpose them, they actually line up very nicely, almost like you're looking at the future. And I see an 8-year gap. So if roughly we're 8 years in the past and we're trying to accelerate and catch up, I can also predict the scale, the volume, and the cost, because I can go backwards and look at where things were. And that's how we're mapping out the need to bring on our supply chain and how to accelerate our investments. I think fundamentally the IRA is an important equalizing tool, and my appreciation to those thought leaders that put that together, because I think they got the numbers just right. $35 per kilowatt hour cell, $10 per kilowatt hour pack. It's a great equalizer. Eventually it's a competitive advantage, and it gives us time to get this market started. And as we get it started and the supply chain gets a boost from local OEMs wanting US suppliers, that's going to give us the ability to raise up the factories that we need to be competitive.
So you're talking about getting the materials from the US or North America at least, and all of the other stuff that you guys need to make batteries from here.
Yeah, we're talking about full North American supply chain by the end of this decade for sure. But by 2026 timeframe, I want graphite and cathode material sourcing locally as well, meaning that we get the key bill of material functions here, and we're working towards that. We have great partnerships that have been previously announced on cathode material. We have some that are not announced on anode or graphite material. Remember, the anode-free cell is also light on materials. We're trying to the best batteries are the ones that use less materials, so we're moving in that direction a bit as well. And but we have a lot of work to do. It's not easy to lift a supply chain up at the same time. Like in our case in the US, we're building the market, then we're building battery companies like one that are trying to make products, then we're building the ecosystem of suppliers all simultaneously. So in that context, we have to take judicious steps to grow on small, medium, large scales. What we're doing is we're at 10 megawatt hours this year. We're at 2.7 gigawatt hours end of next year. Then we're at 10 gigawatt hours the end of 25. That gives us the ability to scale over time using commercial truck and bus, then utility, then automotive to start accelerating beyond that.
Yeah, go into utility a little bit. I'm fascinated that you're looking at storage.
Well, LFP graphite is a well-known durable material for utility scale storage, but has not previously had the cost structure that others have been capable of doing with nickel cobalt batteries. And so LFP graphite now is valued because also the IRA has an investment tax credit that makes batteries 57% cheaper than they were last year. And that's what's giving that market a lift, is that that market wants to grow in its scale of utility energy storage, because solar storage is becoming cheaper than fossil fuel generation. As new capacity is brought online, they're looking forward to gaining access to that capacity.
Real good. I know you're busy. I know you got to get off to other things. It's been fantastic having you on the show. We're going to have you back. We got to keep track of all this because what you're talking about is just brilliant. I love what I'm hearing here.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be with all of you, and your questions were also giving us insight on the topics that we should be thinking about more as well. Loved being with you, and would love to join you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Real good. We're going to take a quick commercial break and be back to talking about more things of cars and the industry.
How do Bridgestone tires stop shorter on what roads? It's their HydroTrack technology. But you don't have to know how the science works, just where the brake is. What really matters is their Bridgestone.
Wow, interesting stuff. 600-mile range, being able to tow. Wow.
If they can give you that 600-mile range, really, that's the kicker for me. I just don't want to have to stop at random scary hotels or the only place in the entire route where there's one working charger at 2 p.m. or 2 a.m. and think like I'm going to die trying to charge my car right now. I just
all right. So Nicole, you actually experienced that. Just tell the audience a little bit about that situation, because you took a long trip in an EV.
I did. I took a drive from Disneyland to Disney World, specifically in an EV, to see how fast we could do it. Not like speed. I'm not trying to break the law, but if you just drive and you charge when you need to charge, and you just, you're sort of trying to hit that sweet spot between the 10 and 80% to get, don't charge all the way to 100, and be judicious about how fast you're going so you're not too heavy on the, the pedal, and to see how we could do it. And one of the biggest challenges was just trying to find some place to charge, and there were limited, there's limited availability when you get into the middle of that route. You're in Los Angeles, no problem. You're, in a city in Texas, so you're close to Florida and Orlando, plenty of places, but sometimes you're like in the middle of the desert and there's one spot available to you, and you get off the highway and cross your fingers. And there were some there was literally a hotel that looked like it should have been from the Chainsaw Massacre. And there were like 4 charging stations and no one there, and one little flickering light, like make it as spooky as you could conceivably get. And then we went to the first, one, and it's giving us like 7 kilowatts. And the next one said, no, we don't like your payment. The next one, we're down to the 4th one, and it finally charges, and it's slow, but it's at least charging. But it's scary. Like you're sitting there with your head just kind of swiveling around the whole time thinking, I can't relax here. This is all the things Mom would have said to you, don't do that. And I'm doing it to charge my car. If I had a little bit more of a range, you'd have more flexibility to say, I am not stopping at that hotel. I'm going to, a little further down the road to get some juice there. So I would just like to see more range, please.
So you see the question there. Big Barney wants to know, what were you driving?
Yeah, I was driving the EV6, not the GT, and I'm going to forget the exact trim, but it was one of the not the GT one, because the range on that is less because of how the power comes out of that one. So I was driving an EV6, which was fantastic. I love driving that. Yeah, the Kia EV6. I love driving it. It was great. It charges faster, that Hyundai architecture that charges faster than some of the other guys. So you were in and out as quick as we could be, as much as we were hamstrung by the charging network itself. But yeah, it's when I wanted more range. I thought it had so much range. I thought it was gonna be great. And I'm thinking, no, I want more. So when he's saying 600, I'm thinking like, bring it. That will make me think about buying an EV.
So you don't have to go to the Bates Motel again.
Yeah, I don't want to hang out at the Bates Motel. It was scary, Gary.
So, it's interesting. So JD Power came out with its assessment of charging. They did study for the last couple of years, and this new study, and they found that satisfaction with public charging is actually decreasing. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. And it's like, so they discovered that, so level 2 charger infrastructure in the US, it declined 16 points to 617 out of 1,000. Okay, so we're getting we're getting very low there. And then DC fast charging dropped by 20 points to 654. And the thing that I found was that, surprise, surprise, the Tesla supercharger is the one that people love the most, the one that's doing the best. And it's at 739 points out of 1,000. Okay. Number 2 is ChargePoint at 606. Okay. So you have 739, second place, 606. And Electrify America is at 538 at the bottom. So, I mean, and they also found that 20% of the people that are going into a charge place are leaving without a charge.
Yeah.
Because of the things you mentioned, it doesn't want to take your payment, or it doesn't work, or it's just all these. So how are we going to get more EVs, even if you have more range?
I think the thing is, because it's sort of one of those things when EVs were really weird, right? Nobody had them. There were half a dozen people in your town that maybe had even heard of them, right? Nobody knew what they were. Then they became more and more popular. People start buying them, become more affordable. Like, okay, now they're not weird to see on the streets. So now people have them. Your friends have them. Your friends are telling you the stories about their nightmares charging. Before, you didn't really hear it. Now you have a little bit more, either firsthand because you were with them, or you heard them say, oh my gosh, that road trip I did at Christmas was miserable because of this, that. So I think the perception is more people are hearing about the challenges. And as you hear about those challenges, it makes it, you're less willing to take the chance. Like, I don't want to do that. I heard about his trip at Christmas. He hated it. So I think the thing that needs to happen is that the charging networks, it's not the vehicles, it's the charging network. It has to get more robust. They have to have it in places where you don't feel unsafe. And it has to just work. And that's the thing. Teslas work. And they're bright. And then these, it's a nice spot. And there's like 30 little glowing Tesla superchargers there on the side of the road, happily welcoming you. And you have one that looks like it's kind of working in a corner of the Bates Motel. You can't have that. You have to have them be places where people would want to stop with their kids in the car. And, I know everybody is making efforts to introduce more charging stations and to improve the network, because I talked to someone at Electrify America at one point after I had done this drive, and he said one of the challenges early on was you couldn't just put an EV chargers wherever you want. You have to find somebody who's willing to let you put it there in that hotel or that property or that mall or that store in their parking lot. And then there has to be enough electric grid support in that area to make it not outrageously expensive to get all the equipment there and run the necessary cables. So sometimes it was a little bit of matter of like, well, this is all we got. It's this, or we have nothing. Well, they need to step up. It's like, okay, now let's get some better ones. The options are out there. I think it was because of that early rush and just trying to give people anything. Now they gotta make an effort to not just give us anything, but give us better. That's what has to happen.
Yeah. A couple of things, just listening to Nicole talk there, I wonder if part of this is, up until very recently, it was the early adopters who were buying EVs, and they forgave a lot of problems. They knew what they were getting into. And now as EVs slightly become a bit more mainstream, you've got people whose expectations are far, far higher, and their tolerance for any problem a lot lower. And just the fact that more people are using these, Mujeeb announced or said it himself. He had to wait 2 hours.
Right.
I mean, that would kill my interest in an EV, having to sit around for 2 hours waiting to charge it.
Exactly. And all those little things, like as you start, like you said, the early adopter just says, I want an EV because I want an EV. I want to experience it. I know it's not going to be a perfect experience and things are still evolving, but I want to be the first guy on the block to have an EV in my driveway. Okay, fine. You're willing to tolerate it. But, that mom and dad on a road trip with their kids do not want to tolerate having to spend an extra 2 hours sitting waiting to charge when the kids have they're done. They want to get out of the car. Right. They want to be wherever you're supposed to be, or someone who's by themselves and it's late at night and you can't find. Those people aren't necessarily buying an EV because yay, EV, the experience. Like, no, I want something that's going to work in the context of my life. The same reason we have a million different ICE vehicles out there. You want something that works for you. Maybe it's a truck, maybe it's a hatchback, maybe it's a fancy sedan. You need to be able to pick and have the same experience with an EV, or it's like it fails you. I mean, and it's an expensive purchase. It's the second most expensive thing most people buy. If that experience fails you, you're frustrated, you're angry.
So John, you said that people have higher expectations now, but the thing that I wonder about is that really the case, or is it simply saying to themselves, you know what, if I go to that Shell station or that BP station, I get the beef jerky, I get the Slurpee, I get my fuel and I'm out of there. Okay. So if you're able to do the same thing with an EV, and you don't necessarily want to hang out at the gas station, right? I mean, there's only so many vape supplies you possibly can buy at a certain point. And so it's just like, no, just get it done. And the real purpose is to take the trip, not to go to the gas station. So the real purpose is to just get the electrons on board and leave, and not feel threatened when you do that. Because, if you can drive down, you can pass as many gas stations as you want before you go into that one gas station where you don't think that the guy is going to, tie you up and throw you in the back. It's just, so I just don't see this as an elevated expectation. I just think it's a normal expectation.
Well, what I meant was elevated expectations versus the early adopters. Early adopters, like I said, they're willing to tolerate a lot. They're blazing a new path here, whereas mainstream people just want, to your point, Gary, they want the same kind of experience that they've had with ICE, even though a lot of people hate going to the gas station. Women especially, touching the nozzle that so many people have, and it smells of gasoline, yuck. And then just the cost of gasoline. People, I mean, that's one thing that's really driving an interest in EVs. In fact, we ran 2 stories today in Autoline Daily that I thought was very interesting. I think, was it a JD Power survey? They found that 48% of car buyers will very likely consider an EV for their next purchase. So you're right, Nicole. If the charging system gets built up and it's reliable and all that, those people are ready to go in. Mm-hmm. But to your point, that charging infrastructure better be there. But the other thing that just floored me, 71% of car buyers have no idea of all this IRA money that's available to be able to buy one. We're in the business, so we're hyper aware of the $7,500 max that you can get as a tax credit if everything falls into place the right way in terms of the battery and all that sort of thing. But I'll bet you the number's even higher. Most people are unaware that you can get up to $1,000 tax credit to put a home charger in place.
I think it's, you would think that when you walk into a dealership, because they want to sell you a car, right, that they would sort of make you aware of what's available, because it varies a little bit from state to state, depending on what your state may or may not give you. You would think that the dealer, in the interest of getting a car off the lot, would say, hey, by the way, you have all these incentives that are going to help make this a little more affordable and make this something that you can buy into. But I've had friends who have literally gone to look at an EV and they come back and like, you do know there's a rebate. You can get money on that. Like, what? I'm like, did you not go to the dealer? Yes. Did they not tell you? Nope. And they, like you said, they have no idea. And it's commonplace to us because it's our business, but that it doesn't get down to the consumer level is unfortunate, because I think people also think they're more expensive than they will actually be once those rebates all come through.
That doesn't surprise me in the least. I have not shopped for an electric car, so I can't tell that experience, but I've bought new ICE cars. And of course, I'm in the business. Maybe that's a little unfair. To a salesperson, I knew far more about the vehicle than they ever did. Whatever vehicle I went to buy, I knew far more than they did. What I found is that most salespeople know how to do all the paperwork. End of story.
All right, John, you're an unfair comparison. Let's just, you're the outlier. Let's make that clear. Okay, so either one of you just go to Ford.com or Chevrolet.com or Chevy.com or whatever it is, and go to where it says EVs, and bingo, it immediately tells you you're going to get a rebate. You have the opportunity to say, what state you live in, bang, it's going to tell you got this money. So I'm surprised that you said, 71% of these people are not looking at a website before they go to a dealership. I
don't think it's that they're not looking at a website. Okay, now we're not John and Gary and Nicole. We're average Joes who don't do this all the time. When you start looking for a car, it is overwhelming. You click on every website and there's a video and there's a graphic, and this is the brakes and this is the new EV stuff. And and we have this fancy stereo system. There is so much information as you're just trying to figure out which of these 5 cars do I like the best. You're just looking at the car. You get an idea of the cost. Like, these are in my budget, but there are so many details on that page. Unless you're scrolling down to sort of which I almost kind of think it was the boring part. Okay, I got a warranty for this many miles. Like the stuff at the bottom, admit it, we all look at the stuff at the bottom. You don't look at that first. You're looking at the car to see if the car is something that will work for you. And I think sometimes it's just lost in the which of these 3 or 4 EVs is the one that works best for my life or and can fit the kids or can't fit the kids or has more power. I think it sort of gets lost in translation, and it is so much information. People need the reminder when they walk in the door. This is what's available to you, and that reminder just doesn't happen.
So speaking of people who are going to buy cars, Cox Automotive announced this week that the average car loan now is at 9.48%. And according to KBB, the average transaction price for a vehicle is $48,334. Okay, so I ask you both, are these numbers going to make a robust auto industry, or are we looking at a situation that is becoming increasingly untenable for people?
It feels crazy to me to hear those numbers. I know they're real. These are trusted organizations, but part of my brain sort of looks at it and says, "Are you guys sure about that? Is that actually the state of the state?" It doesn't feel like it's sustainable. It doesn't feel like something most people can do, and it feels like it sets people up to be biting off a little bit more than they can chew when it comes to their car. I mean, if that average transaction price, that is high. Like, you would expect it to be much lower given that interest rate, but I don't know.
I think the numbers are a little bit misleading in this sense. Up until very recently, we didn't have $110,000 Escalades. We didn't have $110,000 Grand Wagoneers. So, the upscale side of the market has gone crazy expensive. And guess what? They can't build them fast enough either. That's the other thing. And so, when you say, the average cost of a car is $48,000, there's lots of good cars that you can buy for well under 40. Yeah, lots of good cars you can buy in the $28,000 to $33,000 range. And here's the crazy thing. Mitsubishi just dropped the Mirage. Cheapest car you could buy in America, a little over $17,000. Everybody's bitching about, the price of cars is too high. Why don't they come out with something we can afford? Well, Mitsubishi had it, and guess what? No one bought it. So, people.
All right, to be fair, have you driven a Mitsubishi Mirage, John?
Not in years, and I wouldn't either.
Yeah. So
you answer the question.
But if the whole thing is, why don't they make something affordable, and there's something affordable and nobody buys it, that's not what people want, really. What the average American wants is something like a fully loaded Chevrolet Suburban that'll burn rubber across the intersection, get 40 miles to the gallon, and cost $18,000. That's what they want.
Yes. But they're not going to get that.
No, never. Not anymore.
Instead, they're going to get, what was it, the Cadillac Escalade IQ that they just announced, which is going to start at $135,000 the starting price on that thing.
Right.
Like, that's crazy.
But again, what's happening is the lower income people are priced out of, I was about to say getting priced out. No, they're priced out of the market. The used car market is the only thing for them. And so what the auto industry, and this is a big danger for the auto industry, I think, is they keep going after the people who have got the money to spend big bucks on a car. And so that's the only thing that they're building these days, pretty much, or certainly when production was constrained because of COVID and then the chip shortage. I mean, if you can only make X number of vehicles, why don't you make the ones that you can make some profit on? And so that's how you end up with an average $48,000, MSRP, because you've got everything so heavily loaded. And even look at what people are going out when they're buying a new car. They're loading them up. I mean, look at the GMC's success with the Denali and the AT4 range. People are, when they go to buy something, they want everything on it.
Yeah. And I don't know at what point enough people, because if you're buying the really expensive cars, you're probably able to afford buying them more often too. So you keep buying these really pricey cars. At what point do people who don't have the funds for that suddenly push back and say, well, I'm not buying a car. We're going to drive this beat up Camry until it dies, which is never, because Toyotas never die. Like, there's going to be a point where it's like, they're just what are these people going to do?
Right. No, Nicole, you're absolutely right. And that's why the average age of a car keeps getting older and older every single year, because exactly to your point, people are saying, I'm just not buying even a newer used car because I can't afford it.
Well, so there's another option that may happen here, and that would be the Chinese OEMs decide to come to the U.S. market. And so last week, the founder and chairman of BYD, the big giant Chinese vehicle manufacturer, said it's time for the Chinese auto industry to, quote, demolish the old legends of what had been thought to be Chinese cars. And he said, quote, the time has come for Chinese brands. Now, what happens to the U.S. market? What happens to the U.S. car makers if these guys say, yeah, that's what we're going to do, and they're going to eat the tariff? What is the tariff, John?
27.5% for Chinese cars coming into the U.S.
Right. And, and people say, no, that can't happen. And so Morning Consult just did some research, and they discovered that Gen Z adults, which are in Gen Z is like 20% of the US population, they don't really have a bad feeling about Chinese products or Chinese things. I mean, so what do you guys think might happen there?
I don't, and you're right. Like the younger generation might not have the, don't buy stuff in China thing that older generations have. But by the same point, like I think it's going to come down to really whether the car that they bring over, it can't just be affordable. It also has to be good. Like it has to appeal to that consumer, because I don't think it's as much whether it's from China or not that will dissuade, especially like Gen Z, from buying it. If it doesn't hit the mark for Gen Z, they're not going to buy it. And there is a certain element, I think, no matter who you are, again, cars are expensive, no matter whether you're buying a bargain car or $135,000 car. It's a big purchase. You don't want to take a chance that what you're buying isn't going to be around. You want to buy from a company that's going to be here for 2 years or 3 years. You're like, it didn't work, I'm out. Or they just don't succeed. So there's like some risk there that I don't know how Gen Z would react to that. Are they going to think about the fact if a company comes to the US and they don't succeed in the US, now they have absolutely no support for their new Chinese car? Not saying they're all going to fail, but it's a risk. You don't know what's going to happen if they come over.
Well, we don't see it in the US, but the Chinese are taking over markets all over the world right now. Latin America, Central America, Africa, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia. They have not come to the US partly because of the import tariff, but also because US-China relations are not so great right now. And they're kind of gun shy to come here. And their whole attitude has been, hey, we don't have to go to the US right now. We can go take over the rest of the world market. Then we can talk about going into the US. In Europe, they're deeply worried because of the success that the Chinese have. In fact, collective Chinese-made vehicle market share is almost even Steven with German vehicles in Europe now, which is an astonishing statement. And, that's why in Europe, you keep hearing more and more talk of, we got to raise the tariffs. We got to slow these guys down somehow. And I've said it before, I'll say it again right now. When the Chinese come to the US market, they will absolutely take over the lower end of the market. They will just bulldoze everybody out. They're going to have good looking cars, very well made, with the latest technology that is going to be thousands of dollars cheaper than what anybody else will sell you.
So John, when you say the lower end of the market, okay, I wonder whether they might not come in with something higher than bottom in order to say, hey, we're not, we're not the bargain basement here. We're competitive vehicles.
Right. But remember, there's 200, 300 Chinese car companies. There's going to be some that come in on the high end, like NIO. NIO is, going after all the luxe end ones. Xpeng is another one that's going more high end. BYD seems to be able to play any segment of the market that you want to. And then there are other Chinese companies that are going to concentrate on the cheap end. And when I say cheap end, you'll be able to buy, I believe, even with the tariff, a very, very nice Chinese car, somewhere in the $16,000 to $18,000 range, electric, no less. And so that's what I mean. Take over the bottom end of the market, and they've got the cost structure, the economies of scale to be able to do that.
So what happens to the domestic manufacturers when that happens, John?
Well, look, who they're going to clobber are the Japanese and the Koreans first, because where are the Americans? The Americans are not in the low end of the market. They've given up on low cost cars, essentially, or if they do have low cost ones, GM's bringing them from Korea, Ford's bringing them in from Mexico. The Detroit 3 are concentrated on trucks and SUVs. That's probably the safest place to be right now in the marketplace. But, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Mitsubishi, Subaru, even Hyundai and Kia to a degree, those are the ones who are going to be the most threatened by the Chinese. And if you look at where I've been talking about Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and the like, it's the Chinese who are absolutely clobbering Japanese and Korean automakers.
So maybe building those super expensive SUVs over here is not such a bad move after all. Maybe the strategy is that already
so far. And if we get Mujeeb's battery and you can tow for 600 miles, those things are bulletproof from a sales standpoint.
Yes.
So Nicole, since you're more consumer oriented than John and I certainly are. I mean, what's your sense of how things are going in the market right now?
I think, it's tough for consumers. I think people, a lot of people who held off buying vehicles and were sort of trying to see how the whole hybrid battery and EV battery thing worked out. There was a lot of nervousness about that, are looking at buying cars right now. And because pricing is so just crazy and supply is still crazy. And if you want to get that car, you could need it today and you're not going to get it for 18 months. If you're at all even remotely concerned about what the trim is, it might be one on the lot and you take it or leave it, wait a year and a half. I think there's a lot of frustration. It's always a challenging process to buy a car. Nobody trusts going to the dealership. Everybody walks in kind of like, I'm ready. Like you're ready for a fight because you don't want to get taken advantage of. And then to walk in and see there's nothing available, very limited availability, and you have to order things, prices are high, and you have, in some cases, depending on the car, these markups that, couple thousand, 10,000 if it's a really hot car that someone's looking for. It's a frustrating time to be a consumer. It's frustrating. You've been holding on to your cars. Like you said, people are holding on longer than they used to. And then to find out, okay, I held on to my car for an extra few years. And what do I get for that? Oh, now they're outrageous. And I have to wait with this for another year to get what I want. So I think it's a frustrating time for people looking to buy a new car.
So do you think that, and John, you've talked about this a little bit, but I mean, the frustration that exists when people go to dealerships, the anxiety, the angst, the anger, all the other A's that might be associated with that. I mean, is there a possibility that there might be some change in the way cars go to market? I mean, Ford's talking about the possibility of selling their EVs directly online, pick it up at the dealer, but you don't go through that negotiation thing. I mean, is there something real going to happen, or are we just going to continue on?
Well, the automakers are going to try. And you mentioned Ford. And, I would hasten to add, there are some terrific dealers out there. There are some really good ones, and you're not going to go through all that angst and anxiety. But unfortunately, they seem to be the exceptions, not common across the board. And I agree with you, Nicole. Last time I went to buy a car, oh my God, it was the same old crap that you heard about decades ago. Same old. Can you help me a little bit? This is the salesperson talking to me. You got to give me a little bit more here because I'm fighting with my manager for you, which I knew absolutely was not the case whatsoever. So you're going through that stuff. But to your point, Gary, look, Ford's going to try. Franchise laws in the United States are pretty damn strict. And essentially what they say, if you're an automaker and you have used a franchise dealership to sell your vehicles, that's all you can do from here to eternity. You have to use them. You cannot go away from them whatsoever. It's only the startups who have never used franchise dealerships before, and they're still struggling to, because dealership lobbies are extremely powerful. And, Tesla in most states is limited to a handful of stores at best, in some not even that. I was stunned at this latest law that was just enacted in Florida, where even up to a year after a car has been sold to a consumer, if an automaker comes out with an over-the-air update and they want to sell you more range or more horsepower or some other kind of service, hands-free driving, even though it's a year since the sale in Florida, the dealer gets 8% of the revenue from that. And that just shows you how powerful the lobby is. So, kudos to Jim Farley at Ford for trying to change things, because it's a horrifically inefficient system. We'll see if he can pull it off and if others can too.
Yeah, I had an OEM say to me once that the most challenging part they had with dealerships was that when a dealer didn't do the right thing, it tarnishes the brand forever. And it's one dealer. And that is the perception that everybody will have of that dealership forever. And they get the call at their little corporate customer service. And it was really all the guy wanted was a loaner car for 2 hours. You couldn't help him with that. Like these little things. And like they feel like, some of them feel like it's a weak link, that it has a negative impact on the brand, but it's what they're stuck with.
Right.
I thought it's interesting, John, you mentioned the over-the-air updates, and I saw that Lucid had a recall, and it was 3 separate things, and 2 of the problems could be handled with over-the-air updates. The third was loose nuts on the windshield wiper assembly. And I was thinking, at the end of the day, doesn't it all come down to things like windshield wiper assemblies? I mean,
that's exactly right. It's always the little niggling things that, and they're so maddening. I mean, that's a safety item, right? If your wipers don't work and it's in the rain, that's a dangerous situation. So,
but it's funny. I mean, that's one of the most sophisticated. The Lucid Air is just a wonderful vehicle, highly sophisticated, and the electric motors are exquisite, and I mean, it's just the whole thing. And the over-the-air updates, and we all like, oh, that's going to fix everything. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to take a wrench and fix these things. And wrenches have been with us almost since there have been hammers. Almost. I mean, it's just like so crazy.
Right.
My favorite was still, what was it? The BZ4X or the Solaire, the wheels falling off. The wheels were coming off, and I was like, wheels, guys. I felt like you had wheels down.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
That's right. Hey, look, we got to wrap it up here, but Nicole, it's been such a pleasure and having you on the show. I love your feedback and everything that you brought up. Thanks for being on.
Thank you so much. It was fun, guys.
Yeah,
Thanks,
real good. And Gary, we'll do it again next week.
We will.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner.
If you like this program and would like to learn more about the automotive industry, check out our website at autoline.tv or look for us on YouTube on the Autoline channel.